In this video, I climbed 332 steps to the top of the tower at Salisbury Cathedral.
Now, we are going to climb, big numbers now, 332 steps to get to the top. Now, does anybody think they can't do that? Because if you really think you can't, if you can't do it, and piggybacks aren't allowed, by the way, on Dad, so not just looks like, it is the stone that would have been built originally when this cathedral was built.
Why is there so many holes?
I'll tell you in a minute. So if you'd stood here 800 years ago, you'd have the same, practically the same view.
What is that tower for?
Well, that's to get up, that's the stairs. That's the stairs, you're going to have to climb that. Stairs in the corner, there they are. And we are, where do you think we are? Well done. Good, 10 out of 10. Yes?
Are we going up there?
No, we are not. No.
I think the poster. I hope you like the preview. Now the full video starts. Here's the opening times. My new hat. Please press the subscribe button and the thumbs up button. I'm not gonna say much on this one because the guide does a lot of talking.
When we get to the top, we go out onto the balcony. Now, if you go back out of this door, and sort of stand around, there's a funny sort of
the museum bit, that side.
There's a flying sorcery thing.
Right.
We can see that.
Okay.
It might be in my pocket, I don't know. We'll find it in a minute.
It'll be about 3/4 of an hour before we get there.
Pardon?
It'll be about 3/4 of an hour.
Yeah, that's right.
Now it's time to start the tour. Sit back and watch the video.
We're going walkers.
I'm feeling strong.
Have any of you been here before?
Not at the town, no.
You have been to...
I've been here.
Yeah, okay. Well, just have a quick look at the cathedral while we're here, because we'll get a better view of it from up there when we're up there. But just as we've got a sense of the proportion before we set off, it is a very old building. It was built almost, well, over 800 years ago, starting at that end, but it took 38 years to build, from 1220 to 1258. So 2 years ago we celebrated the 800th anniversary of them starting the building, and they start at the east end, the holiest end in Christian terms, and they worked their way this way. They finished in 1258. So 38 years to build all of this, which was, considering the absence of tools and machinery and everything else that, well, in those days would have been the circumstances, it's a pretty astonishing achievement. And in fact, it's the fastest building of any cathedral of this size in the world. They started it and they never stopped. Whereas some cathedrals have taken 700-800 years to build, but they're only just finishing them now, and yet they started around the same time as this one here. I mean, the most famous one is Cologne Cathedral in Germany. I mean, they've started that about 15 years later than this one, but they only finished it in 1880.
Wow.
This is rather familiar in Spain.
Okay, right, now we're going to go in there and I'll give you a safety briefing, and then we can see here we will climb a stone spiral staircase in the corner within the wall, and we will walk along that gallery where the coloured stained glass window is, and have a good look there. We'll cross over and go up another spiral staircase on this corner into the roof space. We'll then be in the roof space. So what I'd like you to do is to look at the ceiling, the roof, and picture, try and hold in your mind a picture of the shape, because you'll be on the other side of it, and you'll be looking down at it, and you'll see the same shape but much rougher because of the way it's been built. And I'll explain all that when we get there. We then go into the tower, which is the section, the crossing, where the more elaborate ribbing is, and then we will go up the tower. We will be at the top of the tower, which is the base of the spire. We don't go up the spire, but we can see right the way up to the top of the spire inside. Now we have to climb. Well, we'll do the rest inside, but we'll go into there, and then we've got the little room there to ourselves. Right, follow me.
Okay.
Now, I'll ask you if you can leave that in one of these lockers, please. You can keep the key with you and then take it out when you come back down.
Right, okay.
And take out it if you need a camera or something like that. Take it out. There's no problems taking pictures, by the way. You can take pictures anywhere, so it's not a problem. But we don't allow rucksacks to be carried up because of the tight spiral staircases that we have to climb in some places, and then you'll catch on things and they maybe throw you off balance. Can you hear me with this thing on? I mean, I don't really like wearing it. But,
Yeah, no, we.
I have, well, you're supposed to, so you can do what you like, but I'm supposed to wear it. Okay?
All right.
Now, we are going to climb, big numbers now, 332 steps.
Wow.
To get to the top. Now, does anybody think they can't do that? Because if you really think you can't, if you can't do it, and piggybacks aren't allowed, by the way, on Dad, so if you can't do it, you better not start, because it's a problem. If from now on you've got to be with me, if anybody's ill or can't carry on, I have to try and radio for help to come and get you and take you down, because I can't let you go on your own, and I can't accompany you down and leave the rest of the people unaccompanied, okay? So it's a big problem, and if nobody can come up, and it's a Sunday afternoon, so there's not a lot of staff on, we all have to come down, and you miss the tour. You won't get to the top. So it is quite important not to go up unless you're reasonably confident you can do it. Anyway, there's 332 steps, all in spiral staircases. There are 5 separate staircases we climb. There's plenty of chance to get your breath back in between each one. Not for me, because I've got to do the talking, but there is for you. One of them in particular is very narrow, but most of them are okay in terms of width. But if you suffer from claustrophobia or agoraphobia, you may have a difficulty with some of these staircases. And you may have difficulty with not liking being up high, but if that really is a problem, then I don't think it's a good idea to go on a tattoo, is it? But people do. I tell you, every time somebody has a problem of some sort. Okay, right, now I look at your footwear, and you've all got decent footwear on. We don't like flip-flop sandals or anything like that, which could move, because your security of footsteps on these stairs is important. Now, there are various alarms could go off if there were fires or emergencies. I know what they mean. Couldn't expect you to know, but I can tell you what to do. If anything should happen to me, if I fall over and break my neck or drop dead with a heart attack or something, there are 3 phone numbers on this notice board, and there are reproductions of this notice board at various locations with a point number which will tell anyone you phone where you are, and they will come up and rescue you, and hopefully me too. But as I always say to people, you've paid money, I haven't. I'm just here for nothing. I'm here because I like doing it. As far as that goes, any medical conditions anyone's got which is likely to make you a risk to do all this climbing, heart pressure, high blood pressure, untreated blood pressure? No? Okay. Well, in that case, let's go. So we'll do the first stage. We will stop briefly, more or less above where we're standing now, a lot higher up, to talk about the woodwork, because there is a lot of wood in this cathedral. You tend not to think, when you go to cathedrals and look at pictures of cathedrals, you see beautiful stone buildings, lots of lovely carved stone, and if you're in North Germany or Northern Europe, a lot of brick-built cathedrals. But you don't tend to think of wood as having a lot of importance, but it actually has a huge importance, and there are something like 7,000 tonnes of wood in this building, and about 57,000 tonnes of stone. So there's a lot of wood, and it's a lot of work getting it here, it's a lot of work cutting it up, there's a lot of work shaping it. But we'll see that as we get there. So if you carefully follow me, we'll start the climb. We'll just take it nice and steadily. This is a nice wide staircase with handrails, which I would suggest you do use unless you're very sure of your footing. I just need to put that there so that we all, in the event of an emergency, they know who's up there. Okay, so let's start climbing. Well, not quite, no. The next stop up is like the attic, but we don't call it the attic. Now mind the step, let's come up a little bit. This level is called the triforium. Don't ask me why, but that's what it's called. Most cathedrals will have one. Now wood is what we're talking about here. You can see all this oak, and it's all oak. It's mainly the original oak. The oak that was built, it was built with. The wood is therefore best part, or maybe more, than 1,000 years old, because it will have been here 800 years, and a big tree would have been needed to make some of these beams, so the tree itself would have been quite old when it was cut down. This stretches all the way up to, we can't really see, but it goes as far as the transepts, and then after the transepts resumes all the way to the east end. Hard breathing through that. What you will notice is that all the wood joints have to be done by good old-fashioned wood joinery. All the types of things you would have learnt at school if you were a boy. In my day, at any rate, I don't know now, but we would have had woodwork lessons unless you were very, very academically bright, in which case it was considered unnecessary for those boys to learn how to do wood joints, and I must confess I was one of those. So I've never did it, but all these joints, mortise and tenon, with pegs to hold the pieces in place. Look at that one there, I mean all the joints, how the heavens on earth you get all those things to knit together perfectly. This one here, very complicated. And you've got curved pieces. Now, you couldn't bend the wood, so you'd have to have found a branch or a young tree in the forest, which was already much the shape you wanted. Then you can cut it and shape it a little bit, but there's no good getting a piece like that and trying to bend it into shape. They didn't have the means in those days to bend a piece of wood that size into that shape. So wood was a hugely important part of the construction of these cathedrals, and indeed smaller churches as well, because there was no other way of holding the roof up, which is basically what all this is doing. It's holding up the roof of the side aisle, There's an identical set of woodwork on the other side. As I say, it stretches all the way from this end, which is the west end, to the far end, which is the east end. And in the roof, which we will be going to in a few minutes, in the roof you've got a whole lot more wood, different arrangement, but that's holding the main roof on. So there's vast amounts of wood, 7,000 odd tonnes in all. And a lot more wood in the spire, which you'll see when you get there. So any questions, I mean, at this stage? Yeah?
Well, how old is that?
Oh, the wolf's head, well that's not very old. But it's older than you. It's from 1970 odd. We have in this cathedral stonemasons who can do the carving of all the work, all the stone. Now, the internal stone that you see is the original, because there's not the weather in here to damage it. So what you see here is exactly what would have been here. Not just looks like, it is the stone that would have been built originally when this cathedral was built.
Why is there so many holes?
I'll tell you in a minute. But when they replace the outside stonework, which does weather, you have to have replacements carved as much as you can, similar to what was already there. So we have trained stonemasons. It's an apprenticeship, a 5 or 6 year apprenticeship, one of the old skills, and the apprenticeship involves an exam at the end, a test at the end to show you can do the job. And that was a test piece that one of our stonemasons, who's just retired actually, he did as his test piece way back in the 1970 something or other. I can't remember the exact date. So that's just put there for the show. Now you ask, why are those holes in the wall? Well, why? Could you think of a good reason? No, probably not. You'll never guess it, I shouldn't think. They're called put logs, P-U-T-L-O-G-S, put logs, and it's because you put the log in. Now that's pretty daft really, but why would you put a log in there? Well, it was the scaffolding. You didn't have lovely metal bars and all these beautiful clamps which the scaffolders put on with electric drills and things like that, not then. It was pieces of wood, poles of wood, lashed together with rope. And you would have them in the wall for securing. And as you took the scaffolding down and you'd finish the job, if it was on the outside, clearly you'd fill them in because the weather mustn't get in. And if it was in the smart areas of the cathedral where the public go, they would also fill them in there. But up here, where nobody would ever go, and certainly not the public, you wouldn't bother. So they just left them open. And you'll see lots and lots of them as we go around, because we're going to be primarily in the non-smart areas, pretty crudely, which very few people get to see. In fact, unless you're on a tower tour, you never would see it at all. So that's what that is. That's what those holes are. Okay, so put logs. Strange name, isn't it? Strange name for a hole, a put log.
That hole seems to be filled up with
Well, they just put some wood in. I don't know. They probably had something in their hand and they shoved it in their hand. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Anyway, let's go down to this drop. See, go down. Yes, go to about the middle.
Go this way, Nick.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, there you are, where we said, yeah. When you're down there, isn't it?
There's a water fountain thing.
there is a lot of chambers.
Then you can hear me better if I'm sort of in the middle. That's all right if I'm sort of not stuck out on the end. We're looking the entire length of the cathedral. That's 135 metres. The blue glass is 135 metres away. Now, it's unusual in a cathedral to be able to see all the way through because it's normally divided up into sections. At least the choir, which is the area beyond that altar that's at the crossing, is normally separated from the rest of the cathedral by a screen, usually a stone carved or a wooden carved screen, a very beautifully piece of work. We did used to have them, and they've been used elsewhere in the building. But they were taken down progressively, but at the end of the 19th century, I think finally the final section went, because we wanted people to be able to see the whole view. Because what you've got in this building is the the best example in the world of early English Gothic architecture. And you can see the uniformity and the style and the uniformity all the way down to the far end of the cathedral and all the way back again. So it's a classical example. And as I said just now, what you're seeing, it's not just like what was originally built, it is what was originally built. It hasn't been altered. And this cathedral is almost unique in never having really been altered. Most cathedrals have had bits rebuilt. They've had somebody's decided they want to enlarge it or add a great big chapel to commemorate somebody or another. Or maybe have to, of course, deal with an incident like a fire or earthquake or something like that. But this building has never had that problem, and it's always been just like this. So if you'd stood here 800 years ago, you'd have the same, practically the same view. Now the spire is not quite as old as the cathedral. The cathedral that was originally built, this building did not have a spire. It wasn't ever intended to have a spire. They became fashionable about 60 or 70 years later, around 1300, when Lincoln and Old St Paul's Cathedral in London built them, and Salisbury decided they'd build one too. So it was built at the crossing, which is makes it more difficult because you're putting all that extra weight on the main columns, because you're not building it down to the ground. You're starting sort of 40 feet off the ground before you even start thinking about the structure. Anyway, what they had to do was to extend the tower and then on top of that build the spire. And in total they added 7,200, we estimate, tons of stone onto those main columns, which were never designed, although designed isn't a word you really use in those days because people didn't understand the details of the engineering, but it wasn't ever intended to have that extra weight there. And as this is built on only foundations of 4 feet thickness, the whole building, which is incredible to think of, but is in fact explained by the fact those foundations sit on a gravel bed that's 30 metres deep, and it's a wet gravel bed, so it's very strong. The columns were pressed into the ground a little bit by that extra weight. Each one, unfortunately, a different amount. So instead of just sinking the thing down evenly, it went slightly lopsided, and the spire is in fact slightly out of true. Not much, but it is slightly out of true. You can see the extent, it was only matters of inches. If you look at this ridge, this stone ridge right along there, and when I talk, we're not allowed to use laser pointers, by the way, that's why I'm having to make do with this torch. That ridge runs along, and as does the one on the other side, and you'll see when it reaches the first of the central column, it drops away, and that's because it's been dragged down as the column has gone into the ground. And if you look at the columns carefully, you may think that they bow out in the middle. And that's the case, they do. It's not an optical illusion, they do go out in the middle. And it was all part of the change that was brought about by adding this enormous amount of weight immediately above the crossing. Now we will see later on in this tour a lot of work that has been done, was done then and in subsequent centuries to stabilise the building because of the instability caused by the sinking and the slightly out of true nature of the spire. There's a lot of external stonework was added to strengthen the building. I can't show you that because it's external and most of it's very well disguised, you can't see it, but I will be able to show you lots and lots of metalwork and tell you some of the other things that were done to strengthen the tower. Now just very quickly, the window behind me, it's a bit of a hodgepodge of glass. Some of it is very old, some of it's not very old, but what I would like to point out is these 3 shields here, and there's 2 more on that window and 2 more on that window. They are the second oldest glass in the cathedral. They actually do date from 1260, so that's very old glass. And this is the arms of Louis IX, his daughter, Eleanor of Provence, who was the wife of Henry III. And these are all their coats of arms. So there were quite a lot of fairly important people involved in building the cathedral, and that's why their shields are here, of course, because they were very much part of the process and of making the decision to build and to build it. Yes?
How big is this window?
How big is it? Do you know, I haven't actually measured it. I should think it's about 30 feet. A lot taller than you, isn't it? I guess about 30 feet, but I've never really been asked that question before. So well done. A new question, an original question.
Yeah, I've got to look that one up now. Look on the answer.
Well, I don't know where I know where I know where there are scale drawings. So I'd have to work it out from a scale drawing. I don't think it's recorded anywhere. Okay, so we now need to move on. Oh yes, you have a question?
If this is the second oldest glass in the cathedral,
Where's
what's the oldest?
The oldest is from 1220. I can't see it because it's underneath us. Remind me when we get to the bottom, I can show you it.
I have a question. Whose coat of arms
If you stop at the door, sorry.
Whose coat of arms were these?
Their coats of arms, do you know, I can't tell you. That's the Duke of Cornwall. I don't know what that one is, I forget. Sorry. If you wait at the door, I can pass you there because it gets a little bit wider. Not much, but a little bit. And then we've got another climb, and we'll be in the roof space. And that's what we call the attic. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
I think she would have. Yeah. And I think she could cope with it as well.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I'm lost. You can see the coast pretty good.
I know, that's what I was thinking. I wasn't going to mention that. That's quite good. The corridor. Yeah, we are. So you need some oxygen.
Yeah, breathing apparatus. Feel the burn.
The original construction for all the woodwork, did they use like metal nails or was it all like wood?
Wood. Yeah. They didn't usually use nails. They knew about nails, but they didn't know about screws or bolts. And they hadn't invented the thread.
Oh, okay.
The concept of a nut and a bolt tightening up
Sure.
didn't come for another 200 years.
Yeah.
About 15th century, I think, 16th century, they cottoned on to what would happen. Just let me turn on some lights which illuminate the woodwork.
Oh, wow.
So, more wood. More wood. And again, most of it original, but not in its original configuration. It was originally scissor arches, big beams that crossed. And we don't know why, but they took those down in the 1500s and replaced them with this arrangement, which is what's called a double Queen's post. A Queen's post being one of these and one of those with that. And it's obviously a double one because there's another one on there. And there are some places that have triple Queen's posts. But the wood itself is original, and you can see that it's being recycled because clearly those beams there with those receptors for a dovetail joint or some whatever it would be are clearly not relevant to there. I mean, you wouldn't have that there. So they must have had another purpose at some point in time. But there was so much effort required to make beams like this. Cutting up oak trees by hand, long ways, maybe 10, 15, even 20 times up and down the length of an oak tree with a handsaw. I mean, a big one, somebody in a pit at the bottom and somebody standing on the trunk at the top. But nevertheless, a work of many weeks, and probably if you're the one underneath with the dust coming down, you're probably, shortening your life by quite a bit as well. But who cared in those days? I mean, you just go and employ someone else. But the diagonal boards there and the horizontal ones here are called sarking boards. They're not of wood. They'd be replaced every time the lead is replaced. And you see the lead is the grey stuff through the gaps. There's about 2 acres of lead roofing, over about 400 odd tons of lead. It's cast lead, it's not rolled. It will move, of course, with heat, expansion and contraction, particularly this side, which is the south side, and will, in the process, slowly wear out where it rubs against the wood. And after about, okay, I've seen you, I'll ask you in a minute, you'll see it will eventually come to the point where it starts to leak. And although you patch it for a while, it will eventually need replacing. And it's about every 150 years that happens. When they take it off, melt it down, cast it into sheets and put it back with a bit of an addition to make up for the stuff that's disappeared completely as dust. So that's what happens. Now the diagonals versus horizontals. Well, horizontals the traditional way of doing it. The diagonal is an experiment to see whether it actually helps extend the life of the lead by having a different arrangement for it to move up and down on. But it's only about 50 years in, and they think it's going to be 150 years anyway. It might be longer if the experiment works. We just don't know. Anyway, what is your question?
What's that for?
What for? String?
Yeah.
The string goes up to that there, which is a smoke detector in case of fire. And I imagine it's simply to lower it down. We don't get involved in that. But that's smoke detectors. Fire in a wooden roof like this. I mean, setting fire to a beam like this would be very difficult. You could put a blowtorch on that and it wouldn't catch light. Those beams, difficult to catch fire, but the slats of wood, the sarking boards would easily catch fire. So it's very important that you've got a means of detecting that as soon as possible, because if those alarms are set off, somewhere in the building there's a fire, and I've got to get you out. But there's lots of ways down. I mean, we're only going to be using, unless something happens, the stairs at the west end, but there are 3 other lots of stairs at the other end, well, 1 in the middle and 2 at the other end. So, there's, whichever bit of the roof catches fire, we can always go down a different way. Yeah. Yes. And another interesting thing, I mean, if anybody broke their leg up the tower, you can't be brought down by stretcher because the stretcher won't go around the tight curves of the spiral staircase.
So how do you get down?
Well, they're lowered down through manholes with an electric hoist to this level through the other side of the wall, which is that wall ahead is the wall of the tower. They're lowered to that level. They're then carried along here and lowered out of the window to a fireman who will be on an extended ladder.
Tower 2, can you hear me?
Tower 2 here, come in.
Hi, is that Les?
Yes, it is, Ian, yes. You got the short straw, I gather. Over.
Yeah, well, we're right up at the top at present. We're taking our time and having a look at a lovely view. Whereabouts are you?
We're in the roof at the west window talking about, or just about to talk about, the wells.
Well, that sounds ideal. We should be able to cross over at the appointed place down at the clock without any trouble.
Yeah, I agree. We'll be there in a few minutes and there's plenty to keep us busy there until you're down. So I think that would be okay. Over. That's it. Happy with that. We have all sorts of rules, partly due to COVID, partly due to tightening up fire regulations, so we can only have one group higher than the clock. When we go through the door into the clock, we can only allow one group above us, which is, I don't understand the thinking behind it, and I do actually have quite a lot of experience of these things, but the insurance company apparently don't like it. So we can only let one group up at a time, so we have to wait there for them, and we're not supposed to pass each other, except at a very small number of designated places where we can get out of the way while they come, or vice versa. And we're going to be okay, I think, on this one. It can be a bloody nuisance at times, pardon my French. Yes?
Why does the big beam why is it so difficult to have it catch fire?
Well, fire is about oxidation. I don't know how much you're into all this. Fire is about oxidation, and it's a surface area related matter. It's why dust, which has a very, very large surface area in relation to the amount of material there, can actually explode. It's a small surface area. Oak is not an easy wood to catch fire, and that's oak. And so you could really put a lot of heat on that. It would char, but it probably wouldn't catch fire. And it's interesting that, I mean, you remember, well, you probably don't, but a few years ago there was a huge fire in the French Cathedral, Notre Dame in Paris, in the roof, and it was the roof that caught fire. And on the nave floor, when it all fell through, there were loads and loads of big oak beams that were perfectly okay. The lighter grade woods had burnt out and the roof had sort of fallen through. And yes, they were charred a bit, but I mean, they haven't really burned. And I mean, I've got a wood burner at home, and I've got some woods actually. I mean, I've got lots of oak to burn, and you can burn, it takes ages to burn it really does. So you could put an awful lot of temperature on that, and yes, it would smoke and it would char as long as you sustained the flame, but as soon as you turn the burner off, it would go out. But not that wood there, not that light wood. Well, once that gets going, that was nice fire before we knew where we were. And once you've got a sustained fire, then those bigger beams would start to burn, and eventually the whole roof would go. We wouldn't be here, I thought, I hasten to add. We'd have gone. Okay, any more questions? Oh yes, sorry, I was going to talk about the roof. When we looked up from the nave floor, we saw the shape, that shape of the roof, with the big carved stone ribs coming down. Now those ribs are 2 feet underneath that, because that's 2 feet thick down to the actual air of the nave. But what you've got were those stone ribs, and they're the first things to be built and installed, and you can only do that with scaffolding all the way up from the floor to that level. And then the stones are all sort of cemented into place, and the shape is such that they lock together, so they'll sort of hold anyway. You then fill the space in between them with stone, which is called tufa stone. Please don't climb on that. With tufa stone, which is a very lightweight stone. It's stone that has had a lot of water irrigating through it naturally, and it's become more like a honeycomb, so it's quite light. There's a piece up in a demonstration piece up at the end there, which I can show you. And then having got that done, they pour this grey stuff, which is medieval concrete, not the stuff that ready-mix would bring to you if you ordered a load. This is made in a completely different way and takes months to set, but when it does set, it's flipping hard. And that would be applied from this side up to a depth of about 2 feet, then it's left to just harden. And as I say, it takes some years to go really hard. But this is the original stuff. You can see the difference because where they put the lights in there and they've drilled through and they've used modern cement to sort of seal the thing in place. And that's a completely different material. Very, very strong indeed, but it does take a long time to set. Based on limestone, just on limestone. So it's not silicate chemistry at all. Modern cements are silicates. Okay, does that answer your question? Right, good. Let's go up to the other end. I've got a couple of things to show you there, and then we'll go a bit on. one off as well. Are we all up here? Just for a moment. See the saw marks on there? Do you see? The actual saw marks from when it was originally cut 800 odd years ago. And what it would have meant, of course, was you'd have to have cut a tree down, which is quite a big task in itself, given that you don't have chainsaws and modern things. It would all be axes and so forth. You'd have this oak tree lying on the ground. You'd have to strip off all the branches, all the foliage, all the rubbish you didn't want. And then you'd have the trunk, and you'd have to cut that trunk from one end to the other using a handsaw to get rid of the softer wood on the outside, because you're only really interested in the core wood, which is harder and resistant to penetration by woodworm and things like that. So you'd have to do lots of cuts to get the soft wood off. Then you'd end up with the core wood, which you'd have to then cut to whatever size beams you wanted to make out of that piece of wood. So you could land up cutting that tree almost certainly at least 10 times end to end. And you imagine being asked to cut an oak tree 10 times end to end with a handsaw these days. I mean, you wouldn't want to do it with a chainsaw, let alone a handsaw. Yes?
What's that bit for?
What's that bit for? To stop you falling through the gate. It's not a very good thing for people to get lost on the tour. In fact, I'd be fired if I hadn't. Yes?
What's that spot for? Under that diagonal stone?
What's it for?
Yeah.
You mean, what is that space for? Well, it's just the space between the outer wall and this, and the roof goes down to there. There's a walkway. If you look at go there, there's a little walkway along, and that's the outer wall, which would be the outer wall of the building. Well, there's the same on the other side. Yeah. Anyway, let's go into here, and then we can some more things to talk about. Okay. Yes, do sit down. Might as well take advantage of this seat. So we're in the tower. Now the tower, as I did explain to you, was originally much shorter than the tower now. And the original tower went up as far as that nicely carved piece of stone. Okay, you see that ridge goes all the way around the four sides. That was the top of the tower. And in those days, before they did the extension, none of this metalwork would have been here. There wouldn't have been a floor or anything like that. And if you'd stood down on the nave floor at the crossing, you'd have looked up all the way past where we are standing up to the roof that was there, which would explain why we've got lots of carved stonework up here, which would be a heck of a waste of resources to have made this in a location which nobody ever saw. So for a mere 80 years, that carved stonework would have been visible to the users of the cathedral, and for the rest of the 800 odd years or so, it hasn't been visible to them at all. So that's one thing. Behind me, how are we going to get? We're going to get the half-hour strike any minute now. Now, very quickly, this machine, the clock, arranges to pull these wires which move hammers that hit the bells. Now, we'll see all this when we get up to the very top floor above us. And any minute now, we'll get the half-hour. And it'll be some of these strings here. The bigger one on the left is the hour bell, and there's another mechanism at the other end which works out how many times to pull the wire for the number of strikes. It's the Westminster chime, if that means anything to you. So as I say, we're just about to get the half-hour one, but I can never coordinate my watch with their clock because they don't keep as good a time as my watch.
14:29.
Well, that'll be right. Yeah. But this isn't necessarily so. No, I mean, your iPhone will be fine. Yeah. That will give you to the second, no doubt. Yeah?
What is that tower for?
Well, that's to get up, that's the stairs. That's the stairs, you're going to have to climb that. We would once, upon a time, have gone up the flight of stairs in the corner. There we are. That's all we get on the half hour. I'll tell you more about everything. The clock is actually only from 1880 odd. It replaced the one that is now on the nave floor, which was the oldest working clock in the world. Is the oldest working clock in the world. It's well worth a look. The only thing, it doesn't tell you the time. Only on the hour when it strikes the hour. And if you miscount it, then you've got the wrong time. There's no other way of checking the time. But that was originally in a bell tower. We had a separate bell tower at one point in time to the north of the cathedral. It got very badly damaged in the English Civil War and was never repaired. And so because of that, it was eventually demolished in about, was it 1870 or something like that? And the clock was moved over here, and that old clock worked from here for a while, but then they wanted something more. Now this clock and some of the bells were paid for by the Wiltshire Regiment of the British Army as a commemorative gesture to their colleagues killed in various important campaigns up to that time. So I'll tell you more about that later. But one of the things we do really want to talk about briefly is all this metalwork, because as I explained, with the extra weight, the tower sank, and it sank slightly out of true, so it leans ever so slightly in that direction. I mean, not that you can see it, it's only inches. But initially, at the very time that it was happening, they put in the white metalwork, wrought iron work. It's considered to be some of the best, if not the best, wrought iron work in the world of that period, because the size of the pieces and the subtlety of the joints are really quite exceptional for the period of time. And given the way you make wrought iron, it's difficult to understand how they would have made pieces as big as that in that time, when resources were so restricted. The interesting thing to note is that all the joints are joints made there, for example, there and there, as if you were using wood. Because, as I've already said several times, they hadn't invented screws, nuts and bolts and things like that, and they hadn't yet learnt about welding and that kind of annealing or any of those processes. So it had to be joined somehow, and they used those methods there, as if it was a piece of wood. Now we'll move over here to let our colleagues get past safely.
The wrought iron, that white wrought iron is 14th century?
Yeah, 1320, 1330. Very, very, I mean, it's a hugely important piece about your archaeology, but we don't even mention it in the guidance because nobody can see it, so nobody comes to it. I don't know there. But it is amazingly good workmanship. Sorry?
Have you had a look at the building?
No, not yet. You want to?
We haven't either, so could we ask you to go up?
Yeah.
We'll do it, and then we can do it on the way down.
Yeah, okay, right then.
Okay, if we just wait by the door over here. Next to the room there.
Okay. Well, we'll go up, and then I can finish off talking about all the other bits of metal when we're on that balcony, because we'll stand on that balcony for a while, maybe to get our breath back. There's not a lot to talk about up there, but... Just a warning, because some people actually find it truly off-putting, is that the spiral goes the opposite way to normal.
Oh, right.
Yes, it's a wrong-handed spiral, this, which I've had somebody actually wouldn't go up. We're all clear, are we?
We are. The last ones, yes.
Well, it has to be, otherwise
Yes.
Ian's broken the rules. Right, follow me, please, chaps.
Bond on sea is good, but you need a nice, if it's dry, for about 3 weeks.
okay? You okay? You frightened to look over? Okay, well, we've talked about the white, which we now have an even better view of. You can see much more closely how the joints are made, and they're just how you would have done it if you were doing it in wood. But of course it's so much stronger, and it was very effective as well, and still is. But there was always concern, and as I think you know in life, people always want to keep doing a little bit more. So Sir Christopher Wren was commissioned just after the time of the Great Fire of London, which was 1666, of course, to come and have a look, and he recommended a number of things, more metal, and this brown metal there, there's some there, and there's another lot you can't see just beneath the floor. He commissioned that being put in, and all this metal work goes through the walls and is held by plates on the other side, so that it's designed to stop it moving inwards or outwards. And then finally, in the mid-1800s, more work was done, and these huge, ugly great things here were put in. And I think they'd hold the Queen Mary up, but they are really, really big, and they were put in by an architect, or at least he commissioned the work, the engineer did it, by a chap called Gilbert Scott, double-barreled surname. Gilbert Scott, well-known architect in English cathedrals and indeed some European cathedrals, and his son, or grandson rather, was the architect for the Liverpool Anglican Cathedral, which was built last century from scratch. It wasn't a change or an upgrade or anything, it was a completely new cathedral. Actually the longest cathedral in the world as well, as it happens. So those three phases of metalwork were all designed to strengthen the tower, and in these modern days, with laser measurement techniques available to us, which are very, very precise and can detect very small movements, they don't detect any movement in the tower at all now. So it's pretty stable. But there were other things done as well, because there were at one time windows in there, and they were bricked up. Christopher Wren's recommendation that you would strengthen the wall considerably if you didn't have all these holes in it, which are effectively what windows are. And he also suggested that in each of these four corners there is a stone spiral staircase which goes up from there and actually goes all the way up to the very top, that at least this section up to here would be filled in, and I mean bricked in, not just sealed off, but filled in, so that they became a solid mass as part of the structure of the tower. And that was finally done, and the last one was finally done in 1939, which was why the wooden spiral staircase had to be installed, because otherwise there was no way of getting up here. But from now on, from here up, we can use it because it's that there. And the other three are not in use. They all could be used. I have been in all of them myself, but you know, we're not allowed to take you into them, except that one, which is a fire escape.
Why is that?
No, that's not a fire escape.
Why can't you use the other ones?
You can use them. I mean, they exist, and they're just not they're dirty and got no lighting and rails and things like that. They're there, but no, you don't want to go down them. It's not very nice. Not bodies, dead bodies. I mean, not people, but pigeons and bats and things like that. Which you still get in these ones. I mean, I personally regularly clean the spiral staircase we're just about to use, because we have a small team there's about 50 guides in all, and there's about 6 or 7 of us do the cleaning here, because the cathedral cleaners aren't allowed up here. So, okay, there we are. Well, we've got our breath back, so let's go on up to where the bells are. Let's do that. I'll go. Let me go first.
Yeah.
Can you turn the second switch? The one that's that one? No, that one. Yeah, that one. That lights us up for us. Now, this is a very narrow staircase. It's the narrowest one we'll use, but there's no one here needs to have any worries about it. Some larger people do. You're okay. Now, mind your head, because it's a low thing, but it's also got a step down. So there's two things to remember, which when you get to my age becomes a challenge.
Yeah, but you
Okay, you follow me now.
Yeah.
Logan, stop moaning.
We'll have to. Otherwise we all have to go down, which you don't want that either, I'm sure. Okay. So these are the bells, and they will ring in about a minute. The top ones ring the chime, or strike the chime, which is what we heard last time, but it'll be the 3/4 of an hour one this time, which is a little bit longer. The big R bell we won't hear while we'll hear it when we're up above. We'll hear it go off, but we won't wait for it. It's too, we haven't got the time for that. The big bell is the only one of these bells that has an origin back in the original bell tower.
Right.
But it's only partially true to say that, because all the bells that were in the original bell tower were damaged by the fighting in the Civil War, and that one was cracked, so it was recast. So it's the same metal and the same company making it as well. And it's the same bell in every respect of size, dimensions, pitch, and so forth. But technically, I suppose it's not the original bell. But that is the nearest we come to one of our original bells. Those ones, the top ones, were part of the donation for donation, yes, made by the Wiltshire Regiment, along with the clock, the 4 bells that strike the chimes. So we'll hear that any minute now. And we'll know it's coming because we'll start to see those wires trembling as they tension up. And you'll see them pull the hammers, and the hammers will drop back onto the bells. And we do it that way because if the bells were swinging, which is the more conventional way of making them ring, there would be too much vibration for the tower. And the tower is not that strong. Not that we want to have blooming great bells swinging around causing huge amounts of vibration. Yeah? That's a lot, man. Yes. In fact, if it had been going to go off, I'd have been asking the 3 of you to start counting the number of seconds that you could hear the reverberation, you know, the sound of the bell carrying on after it had been struck. And it'd be interesting to see what you get, because it's a very long time. When you're this close, particularly, it's over a minute for most people. I can hear it for about a minute, but older people lose the ability to hear the higher sounds as they get older, generally. I mean, that's not an absolute rule, but they generally do. And I can hear it up to about 60 seconds, but I'm told a young person like you, or people like you, could probably hear it up to about 70 seconds? Maybe? But we are going to be able to try it, because we're not going to be here when it goes off. So, Lots more wood, ever more wood. And there was a lot of strengthening of the building done, and you can see here, this stonework here includes some extra strengthening which was not part of the original structure, but was done in about the 15th or 16th century to just give it that little bit more rigidity and make it stronger and more stable. This manhole here is the one I was telling you about. You'd have been lowered through this on your stretcher, and if the incident had happened higher up, there's another one just above us, and that's where the electric hoist is up above us, where we'll be going next. Our final climb is that right there, and then we will be able to see into the spire, look up into the spire. So, any questions about this bell chamber? Yeah. Yes?
How is it gonna open?
What, this? How's it, what do you mean, how's it going to open? There's a key there. The key to open the padlock is there, which I would open if I needed to. And then you lift, then you haul it up, you see. Okay? Interesting questions you people ask, isn't it? I've never ever asked me that before. How do you open it? Well, you open it. The key is there. I mean, obviously it's locked so that people can't just casually open it. But I mean, it's every year, once a year, that process is tested. Every year it's done. There's what's called a dry run. Somebody is put on a stretcher right up at the top. In fact, it's the lady who runs the shop down in the bottom. She's put on a stretcher. She's lowered all the way down to where the clock was, and then carried along and out through the window. Every year. We always say she must fancy the fireman. Yeah, but that's very unfair. So, any questions? Yes?
How old are the bells?
The bells, well, the ones at the top date from about 1870-ish, something like that, when the donation was made by the army. That one was recast around the time Charles I was beheaded, which was 1678, was it? Something like, I should know that, but I'm afraid history and dates were never my strong point. And its original bell, from which it was cast, would have been around 1300. Okay? I don't think anybody knows exactly. There's no records of that. Okay? So, we'll go on up. This is the last climb, so don't, if you're beginning to feel desperate about climbing, this is the last one you've got to do. Okay?
How often do you do this tour?
Well, we're only meant to do it maximum of once a day, and there's 50 of us. But a lot of them don't hardly do any.
No.
A few of us do rather more.
I was thinking,
But I was saying that some of us do cleaning. I mean, I do the cleaning. The 6 of us do cleaning, with extra voluntary work in the tower, because the tower cleaners are not allowed here. And I recently hoovered the stairs we've just come up. We do this. In the course of a day of doing, half a day of doing that, I mean, you could go up and down 2 or 3 times, carrying hoovers. So yeah, it's tiring. on the right there. Can you turn the television on? There's a switch on the right, just sort of under here somewhere. Under here somewhere. Okay. Now mind your head. Mind your head. Just, you would have skinned yourself if you'd not. There we are. No, that's all we get.
Yeah.
Because they're just there. That is just the other side
Yeah.
of those doors.
Yeah.
But even the windows are blocked out so
Yeah.
that you don't.
No, that's fair
disturb
enough.
them. They don't want to be stared at by all these
No,
walking people.
and I knew we wouldn't, but I just wondered whether you might see them come in or something, you know.
Well, when we're out on the other balconies, we'll often see the other one of the pair.
That's what I was hoping.
I mean, we may or we may not.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee it, but we often do.
Well, they on 4 eggs.
4 eggs at the moment. Yes, there's no hatchings yet. Hatchings probably next week. I think they're expecting. They're sort of expecting them to start next week.
Next week. Oh,
Okay. Now, if you all look up.
Just kidding. It's a peregrine falcon.
Well, you can't. I'm afraid not even I can go up the ladders. It doesn't get you anywhere, unless you want to go outside when you get to the top. Which I wouldn't recommend. You wouldn't be allowed without ropes, but. I'll explain what it's for because it's not probably what you think. And indeed, if you'd done this tour 20 years ago, you would have been told that this was the scaffolding that was originally inside as they constructed the spire, but that is now known not to be true because the wood isn't quite old enough. So it is actually about 100 years less old than that, and was put up, we believe, but it's only a calculated guess, to amend some damage to the spire in one of the enormous storms that swept across Europe in that period when the top of the spire was quite badly damaged, very top if you think. And it was left up sensibly, I would have thought, because they knew they wanted access, and I can't understand why they took the original stuff down. They must have known they wanted access, but they clearly didn't. So if we just quickly come over here and have a look at this drawing, you can get a better idea of what we're talking about. The scale drawing of the spire. Now, a spire is a structure which is of regular shape but continuously reduces in diameter to a point. That's a spire. And we are, where do you think we are? Well done, well done. Good, 10 out of 10. I have all sorts of people saying, oh, I should think we must be about there by now.
oh gosh.
No. We're there, yeah. We're at the bottom because we're looking up into it. And if you think about it, we're suddenly in an octagonal spire, aren't we? Now, how's that happen? Because we were in a square tower just before we got up here, aren't we? Weren't we? Well, you just ducked under it. In each corner, there is that arch, which you nearly crashed your heads on. It's called a squinch arch, and there's 4 of them, and they bridge each corner to create 4 extra sides. That's how you've got the 8 sides for the spire. Yes?
What is that?
Well, it's a wheel, and I'll tell you all about that in a minute, okay? So, you have the means to get to the top this way, but we simply aren't allowed to do it. There's only about 3 people in the whole community of the cathedral, the clerk of the works and a couple of his guys, who are allowed to go up there, and they'll go up there for several reasons. I mean, if they're only inside, they'll be checking the stonework and the mortar and electrics and things like that, and there's temperature sensors and all sorts of stuff up there to detect fires and smoke and things like that. But sometimes you do have to go right to the very top, because up on the very top there are warning lights for low-flying aircraft, red lights. there is an anemometer, in other words a wind speed measuring device, which records down in the nave, and I have to check that before I bring you up, because there are certain wind speeds which limit what we can do when we come up. And there's also the cross, which you have to polish. They not like to get all the bird poo off it every now and then. So, to get there, how do you get there? Well, you go all the way up to the top, then you can't go any further, and if you did go further, you'd simply get yourself wedged into that tight little corner. So you have to go out through a little manhole on the side, and you climb up the outside. Now that's not as bad as it sounds, although it's bad enough, because it has got like metal steps set into the stone. And you, if you are out there, you will be roped as if you were climbing a severe rock face in, you know, El Capitan in California or something like that. And you'll have double ropes, so you move one rope onto one clip, and then you do as you go up. So you'll always be attached by a rope. And those metal supports that you can use as footrests and clamps for your rope do extend to take you over that quite substantial overhang, which would be quite challenging unless you're an extremely accomplished climber. But when you stand on the top, a typically sized person's head would be about there. So that would be you standing there, and you'd look down, and your sight line is determined and dictated by this cross section, but it's circular, as you look down on it, by this piece of stone here, the capstone it's called. And you can see that limits your view out there. You can't see the spire. So you stand on the top and you have no means of seeing what is holding you up there, except this blinking great piece of stone, like you're in Dandare when I was a boy, you know, on this little floating machine. But that's past most of your since I'm a lot older than any of you. So, you know, really that must be quite scary. I would grant that. So anyway, that happens once a year or thereabouts, when they have to go up and change the light bulbs, and they will service the machine, the anemometer, and in fact they had to do it twice last year because they had to change the anemometer as well because it broke. So that's the spire. The stonework is about 18 inches thick at the bottom, but it gets thinner as you go up. It's only about 8 inches thick when you get to the top. But all the stone, and this is where we come to your question now, this big wheel, this was the wheel that was used to bring up all the stone from the nave floor. It would have been operated by men, because you wouldn't have, couldn't really have donkeys working up here, and you need a hell of a lot of hamsters to get half a ton of stone up. But so a hamster wheel it is not, I can tell you that, but we always have a laugh about that. But that is extremely finely balanced, and I'll show you in a minute that I can move it with my little finger. And it's only on a wooden wood to wood pivot. There's no sort of ball race, they didn't have them in those days. But it would have been necessary to have 2 men pulling and 2 men acting as brake, because of course you could have up to half a ton of stone on the end of the rope, and if someone slipped and it started to move downwards, there's no way you're going to be able to arrest it. So you've got to have brake men always holding it so that it doesn't go backwards, and that's what would happen. So all stone that's from this point upwards, have to wait for this now. Still hear it? Yeah, I can hear it. I can still hear it now. It's getting marginal now. I don't think I can hear it now. Really? Well done. That is impressive. Let me just show you how easy this wheel is to turn. Because it's very, very easy indeed. If I just put my little finger on there. There we are. Very easy. This is the original wheel, apart from a few pieces of wood that have been changed in the intervening years, but a lot of it is the original wheel. It would have been here 700 and something years ago when they were building this. Okay, so what other? There's lots to talk about, it's just a matter of picking something that... The interesting thing is, if you look up, you may think this is here to support it, to support the spire. And a lot of people would think that, and you would be encouraged to think of it if you look here and see that it is actually touching the sides. But at this level, all 8 do touch the sides. At no other point do they touch the sides. So they're not there to actually support the spire in the normal sense. They're there to provide 2 things: access for checking structure and electrics and things like that. But the more subtle thing is that this pole here goes all the way up to the top. It changes here into a metal rod, which in the drawing is a threaded rod because that's a new one. It would originally have been a cast iron rod with a ratchet to tighten it up, and that goes up into the capstone, and it's fixed into the capstone. And this is tightened up to compress the stone on the spire. Not too much, but just to give it rigidity, so that it makes the spire stiffer. Now that's not something you probably ever think of in a million years, is it? But it's all about rigidity. These things survive for the time they have because they're rigid, and there's enough flex, there's some flexibility in them. I mean, they say, and I can't argue, that if you're right up here, it moves about 10 inches in a storm wind. I'm not quite sure where the give is, mind you, but I mean, you either think, well, that's not very much, and you can also think, well, actually, it's a hell of a lot, because where does it move? You know, it's a stone. I mean, stone doesn't bend, so where is it actually coming from? Nobody can ever answer that. I ask the question. But, I mean, we're here after, I mean, this has stood for 800 years. No, 700 years. Yes?
What are these numbers?
What are these numbers? Good question. They are numbers, they are the numbers of the stones, because all the stones are individually numbered, so that they know if they're taking one out, what they get the drawing out of the file down in the drawing office, and they make a replacement from the drawings they've got, rather than having to trail up there every flipping time to see whether it's quite the right fit, which would be a bit boring, wouldn't it? Okay, so next we go outside. Those of us who want to. What was that? Oh, yours. Oh, I was going to say, because of my radio. That would be an alarm on my radio. So, we'll go out onto the north. It was the second cathedral they replaced. The dates I've given you are the dates for this one to be built, but there was a cathedral built in Salisbury just after the Norman conquest, just after 1066, in fact. I mean, it was built in 1072 to 1098. And it was a Norman structure building up on what's called Old Sarum, which is an Iron Age hill fort, which was made into a military base by William I. He wanted to have troops in the area to suppress any insurrection, any people who might be objecting to him having taken the throne of England. And he wanted a cathedral. So he got permission from the Pope in Rome to build a cathedral up there. But it didn't really work because the soldiers wouldn't let the clergy use it sometimes, and in the end they said, sod it, let's go and build another cathedral somewhere else. Yes?
Are we going up there?
No, we are not. No. No.
Good.
I mean, I personally would like to go up there, but I'm not allowed to go up there, and you certainly aren't allowed to go up there.
I think I'd want to stay here. Okay.
Well, yes, I've had a few people have said they'd really like to go up, but I think on balance, people generally think, I'm quite happy where I am, thank you.
Yeah.
It's nice. I'll look up and see.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let's go and have a look out of the north side. Then we'll do the east, then the west, but we can't use the south, because that's where, that belongs to the American forces.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right, if you squeeze past me,
Oh, okay.
you go left, you've got to go left. the end because otherwise there isn't room for us all. If there was 12, which is the normal maximum, without closing the door. Well, the bell tower, when it existed, was just in front of that cafe, which is called the Bell Tower Cafe. Now, in the summer, when the grass is drier and the earth dries out, you can see the foundations. In fact, I can see them now because I know what I'm looking for. But if you look at the two brollies that are up, and you move just a little bit to the left, you might see the start of what is a square area of slightly different coloured grass. Well, that's where the foundations are just beneath the surface.
Oh, okay, see the umbrellas? To the left of it, there's a little square of slightly different colored grass. Is that part that looks like a L?
Yes,
that's part of it as well.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. They would be sort of buttresses for the original spire. Because it was quite tall. I mean, it would have come up to pretty much the height we are here, the bell tower. So it was a big bell tower. Now, the original cathedral was, I say, up at the Iron Age earthworks, which are almost dead ahead. You can see it's almost straight ahead with a few trees on, some grass levels going up in steps. Well, that was an Iron Age earthworks, is an Iron Age earthworks, meaning about 2000 BC, that sort of time. And then that was fortified by William I, and the first cathedral was built up there. And then they moved down here. And they used the stone from the first cathedral to build the wall around the close, which, because this cathedral is completely enclosed on three sides by a wall to designate the private area of the cathedral, and the fourth side is the river over there, so it doesn't have to be walled on that side.
So that's what they call a hill fort?
Yes, that is a hill fort. Yes. And there's quite a lot of them.
Daddy, when are we going to go down?
This place is fine for tourism, but not much. You wouldn't want to live on the one.
You like it?
There was no water for a start, and we had no drinking water.
Look, picture, look at the camera.
But the city of Salisbury, the odd thing is the city of Salisbury didn't exist when they built the cathedral. What population there was lived at Old Sarah, which is the hill fort up there. There was a little village over that way, a village over that way, but only a few hundred people. And the city grew up around the cathedral. And it's really extraordinary that they built a cathedral so big when there wasn't actually anybody really to use it.
Do they at least have a monastery?
No. That's one of the interesting things. Although it's got cloisters, which you've seen, I imagine, and that's usually a symbol of a monastic origin. This one didn't. They built the cloisters simply because they thought it looked nice. No, this was not a monastic.
The light color.
What's called the first foundation cathedral, which means its first founding was as a cathedral, not as a monastery.
Okay, I got you.
Can we go this way?
I'll go this way.
Well, that's Exeter Street there, and that's Exeter Street roundabout just there.
See the
You go up, that's the Blandford Road goes on, and the Thorny Ridge Ringwood Road goes that way.
Yeah, no one,
that's all. I forget what it's called. That new estate.
Rowbarrow.
Rowbarrow.
Yeah, Rowbarrow. So we're not come very far. This is my birthday present.
Oh right.
We would have been able to see your car safe if we'd have parked it on the top.
Yeah, that's what I said. I'm sorry.
Not my house.
So the one over there. Yeah. Yes, you can't go that way. Sorry, no.
Side now. Should be able to see her.
I see the post person's house. Yeah.
How's that blue thing, Logan, that you seen earlier? You see it?
We're out west.
Oh, there she is, on the seat over there.
I think.
You can see it.
Oh, that's where we were.
Was it your friend who didn't want to come?
No, my friend,
wife,
it's
yeah.
his wife.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
they gave this trip for my birthday,
Yeah.
and my friend was ill this morning, couldn't come, so Nick said he'd come because he wanted to do it anyway, so it's worked out brilliant.
I'll pay sacrifice.
And actually, I'm not sure if my friend, she was coming first thing this morning, but she's been poorly.
So, alright.
You see, these are the water meadows that they actually go for.
Right, oh yeah, on that red t-shirt.
Yeah.
Way. And originally, of course, you wouldn't have had the industrial estate there. And
I think that's there.
Well, if it's not somebody else's question.
It was all about getting green pasture for sheep, because wool was the main industry of Salisbury in the Middle Ages, funnily enough, and I didn't know that until I had to learn all the stuff for this job. But it's what's called a controlled water meadow, so the level of the river is controlled by a series of dikes, and there's vents to let water into the fields, to flood the fields so that they grow, and the grass grows. So there's always good grass for the sheep.
Did we only have one ticket?
You would have had 2 tickets, wouldn't you?
I want to go to the blue thing.
Yeah, come on, get down.
I want to get down now.
You can't leave it, so the sheep might as well eat the stuff.
I think it's
Well, the
a
sheep,
bouncing
sheep
thing.
have their value as animals to raise for
Why is
a
there
bit
blue
of wool,
on
but I mean
it?
for obviously meat.
And we just be
But most of the houses on this side are privately owned.
around.
Yeah.
You've done very well coming up all those steps, haven't you?
We had a prime minister called Edward Heath. Have you ever heard of him?
I'm laughing because it just fell off that blue
Well,
thing.
English people don't know either. But I mean, he died about year 2000. That was his house
Please
over there.
doing
The
it.
one
Please
that's
pick on the
the
grass.
big one called Carvey. That's a museum. Come one this way, and that's the lovely garden down the river. That was Edward Heath's house. And then you've got the big house here, the North Canopy. That's an old.
She's going, I think.
Oh,
no.
All this lot was a teacher.
It's
Oh, you have to keep the gardens nice over there, don't you?
yeah, don't you just? You can't see your face.
That's the end of the tour. There were no point videoing the way down. This is the badge I got, and this is the oldest clock in the world he mentioned. And this is the oldest window. This is me and the tour guide. He were called Les and he were very good. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe.